Yo, hello there, LOL Coach KB here. So specifically, I want to talk about Ekko, a possible rework adjustment. Here are some things, of course, I've written down, and I'm gonna explain my actions soon. So let's talk about Ekko's passive, for example. If we compare it to other passives, such as Silas's passive, Talon's passive, and so on, we can see that they usually have more flat damage. Now, I know that Ekko's passive has a rather high 90 percentage. Of course AP scaling, but Talon's passive also has high AP scaling, right? Well, also I note that Ekko's passive can be a bit more reliably proc because it actually does apply on your basic attacks, and again it can affect minions, of course, and monsters, right? But it still faces some challenges because often it's difficult to proc it even on melee champs without getting heavily punished, especially into like very long range champs such as Alcos, right? So really easily they could actually maybe nerf a little bit the speed of it and buff the flat damage values, right? Now let's move on. Ekko's Q does not deal much damage. The second part, when you have more AP, it will deal slowly more damage, right? The first part does a little more than the second part, but this does 105 damage. Now, into a champion that has a Mort, this already takes 24% magic damage, but if he has a Morons, it can go up to something like 30, right? So this does not do much. And often, let's say hypothetically, you hit the first part, but the second part, more than often, it just doesn't connect, right? So really easily the flat damage values could be buffed, because if you compare it to, for example, other champs that are similar to actually Ekko. I type Gragas, right? Gragas fandom, Gragas. He does dash, he does kill himself, he has AoE, in his kit he's AP of course, or Sylas, Sylas fandom. It can be like, there are like many of course comparisons that I would say they are similar to Ekko, but better in many ways really. For example, Gragas' Q. You see it has almost the same cooldown as Ekko's Q. It has a slight cast time, of course, same as Ekko's Q. From the other hand, targeted range, it has a similar amount of range. It's kind of similar as far as Ekko's Q can go. It's AoE. Now, the difference between Gragas' Q and Ekko's Q, that Gragas' Q can be more reliable. Now, it can be a zoning tool, right? Ekko's Q also can be sort of a zoning tool, but it's not. It does not deal as much damage when, of course, the Gragas' barrel actually does reach its 2-second part where he does more damage, but again, like, that's not always reliable, so I won't really like add it. Of course, I won't really add it to the conversation, but wave clear wise it still can be quite good. And now when it comes to slowing, right, so this can slow up to 60%, right? But when of course the cask is empowered, it's gonna slow a little more. And so, as I said, the main issue is that it does, like, this does usually less damage than the Gragas Q. I know that both parts, if both parts hit, then you would say, well, it does more damage than the Gragas Q then, but that's the issue, usually both parts don't really hit. So let's move on from this ability. So one way, as I already written down some of my ideas, is to actually Q more damage on first part, and for 1 second you could get a 30% movement speed buff. Now why do I say it? Often you're gonna face matchups such as Vel'Koz, where you need some extra sidestepping ability and more gap close, right? Beside your E, you maybe need a little bit more gap close. So if you can actually hit your Q, it would be nice to get some extra movement speed, while also you can connect your rest of the abilities, and you're gonna get haste from your passive to disengage. So that's like one of the ways to actually buff Ekko. I would say buff the first damage of his Q. Early on an assassin it's damage, same way I would buff a little bit, but his passive, but only specifically into range matchups. So for example, if someone has over 500 range, generally speaking champions that are range, they have over 500. They will actually take more damage from Ekko's passive, while the melee ones shouldn't take way more damage, because then Ekko may become some type of insane lane bully, so we don't necessarily want that to happen. But the flat damage value could be really easily buffed, especially at least early on. If Red Games doesn't want to buff it later on, at least early on, because later on it's gonna scale with 90% AP, which is high enough. So it doesn't necessarily have to be buffed that hard, but again, they could also cut some of the movement speed you get because it's high already, and they could give it more damage. Now let's talk about his W. His W is insanely unreliable. So what I've written down about his W, for example, his W could stand for 1 second or 1.5 seconds. He would have less shield, and less CD, but more reliability. Now, why do I even say it less shield? The issue with Ekko's W, it's a bit of a stupid ability, because you stun someone, but then you get a shield, and then you're like, okay, but what am I supposed to do with this shield? Now, if someone has a cleansing ability, or tenacity, it could be useful, but not too much early on. That's the thing, not too much early on. Well, also it has a passive effect. It only triggers when someone is around under 30% HP, right? You're gonna deal like 4% more damage. Of course, it's gonna scale up. Now, this also has issues. What if it would be reverse, or what if it would be similar to Blade of the Ruin King or Viego's Q, which is basically Blade of the Ruin King, which means that when like you all the time gonna deal a little bit more damage, but progressively you're gonna actually deal less based on how lower people's HP are, or they could just reverse the ability itself, which means that when you go in, you Q, you go, you hit your basic attacks, you keep hitting people, you actually deal more damage, but after a certain percentage, you actually don't get the bonus damage anymore, or it will deal less, because often, like in laning phase, especially in mid, you won't necessarily get value out of it. So this is more so about like mid Ekko, right? Because it's hard to get value out of the passive effect. Now with your last hits it will help here and there, but even the passive and active is heavily unreliable, right? And the cooldown is very high. So for an ability that's so hard to hit, it has a very long cooldown, right? So that's like one way to work around the ability itself. Which again, as I said, they could rework both the passive itself in different ways and the activatable, so that, as I said, it's all about like reliability. Like you don't care stunning someone for 2.5 seconds if it borderline never hits, you know. Okay, now let's move on to his E ability, right? Now E could deal more damage, or if you want to be creative, it could silence for 1 second. Or maybe for 0.75 seconds, if that would be a little more balanced, right? Now, why would you do that? Why would you give a silence to Ekko? Look, Ekko Z, right? I know that it has a lower cooldown than Gragas's E, but if Gragas hits his E, then the cooldown itself will be similar. Same as if I compare it to Sylas. So this E doesn't have the highest amount of base damage, right? It has only 50. Now Sylas is E, right? Scroll down to his E, of course. Has more base damage by 30. And also it has a 100% AP ratio, right? Not a 40% AP ratio. Now I know that arguably it has a bit more cooldown early on, right? The mana cost is a bit higher as well, right? But it does way more damage. Now, I know that Ekko Z is point and click, so people may argue, oh my god, but it's point and click. So it's not supposed to do insanely high damage, right? The issue with that logic is that as an assassin, if you don't have enough pressure early on, that can suck, especially in the patch where we are in, where bruisers like Olaf and these type of champs are like super good. Bruisers overall, right? It's sort of a second durability patch we receive right now. Ekko hardly finds its place because he doesn't only face his difficulties into champs like Rengar, but also into bruisers, because evenly they're usually gonna scale way better than Ekko does. But for example, Sylas and Akali can scale evenly without being worried. Again, if I go back to Gragas, he knocks back, he can cancel dashes, such as a whatever ability, you know. It can dash longer, of course, than an Ekko if we only count the first part, of course. It can stun people, right? It does have a way higher like base damage, and it has more AP scaling as well, right? Which is again something nice to like watch out for. You can use your abilities, but Ekko can use all of his abilities in his WE, of course, so it's not really like a big like mechanical difference, but you guys get my point that even though I know that it's point and click, it could be a little bit longer perhaps, or it could deal more damage. Those are my arguments. A damage buff on like anything would be nice, but again, like not too much, so he's not like an oppressive like lane bully, of course, for melee champs, right? Although there are like lane bullies like Rumble, like it does quite a lot of damage early on, so it wouldn't like be completely bad if Ekko becomes something of a similar thing. But as I said, like as I would balance like these things in a way that it doesn't deal like a lot of damage into melee champs, so it's not like insanely broken into them. because he can more reliably hit a Q into melee champs. That's not like Akali or something like that. So it could be like balanced in a way that it's not like too broken. Another idea I had, of course, is a silence on his E, which would be really nice because when you go in, you proc your passive, you silence someone. It's easier to actually like proc your passive without people dashing away, without people just like stunning you or whatever. So it would be interesting to have that as a cool little mechanic, so people can instantly react to your Q slow and you can connect your Q more reliably. It could be even a half a second silence, just a half a second silence, right? It doesn't have to be even 1 second, right? If you want it to be even more like less punishing, then it could be a half a second silence. Not a stun, not a root, just a half a second of a silence would be interesting to have. Okay, so R, right, does have more AV or less seconds. What do I even mean by that? Now, not specifically even this area could be bigger, but my point is that when you ult back, it would be nice if you would AoE the whole area backwards actually, in a way that not only the middle area of your ult where you arrive back will actually deal damage, right, but the whole area backwards, right, without like, although because it's more reliable of an ability now, of course, like the AoE around your ultimate backwards shouldn't deal like insane damage, right? It shouldn't deal too much damage, but it's nice that at least it gives like it does somewhat damage and it provides a passive proc, so it can be used a bit more aggressively. So that would be like an interesting like way to actually like give more damage to Ekko's all-in, because Akali, for example, can have it, right? And so Ekko can like mainly use his ult defensively, sometimes offensively. And so one other idea I had about Ekko, now I know that some people use the trick, they don't put a point in their ult unless they're gonna use it, so it's more tricky, so people don't see it. But what if people don't ever see his ultimate? Never. Never. Because often people are gonna have wards, control wards, what have you. And so what's gonna happen, that often people are gonna see Ekko and they're gonna see like where his ultimate gonna go back, right? So if people wouldn't be able to see it, it would cause more uncertainty and more cautiousness around Ekko, which would end up giving Ekko a bit more pressure and less predictability where he goes back with his ult, which is good escaping wise and to use your ult a bit more aggressively. This thing wouldn't be too broken in higher ranks, but in lower ranks it will be usually a little bit more surprising. So that's again like way to interestingly buff Ekko, because as I said, Ekko is kind of like Sylas but worse, or Gragas but worse. That's how I see Ekko. I think there are just like many AP champs that are just better than Ekko. Even on consistent curves, like some champs like Akali and some other champs can be played more so consistently without relying on getting like kills actually, while Ekko just actually does rely on kills because he gets actually quite easily outskilled by bruisers. So in many like jungle or lane matchups, it's really nice if you can actually get some degree of kills actually. Alright, so I think that's like pretty much it. My idea wrapped up. Now I was thinking of of course rework, a complete rework for Ekko's ult, but the issue is you can't really remove that because that's part of his role, part of his identity, right? That he goes back in the time, he shatters time, right? So it's not something that you can actually just take away. So that's why I was like thinking to sort of a little bit work around it, right? Now another thing I was actually thinking of is giving Ekko 2 Qs, but that may be a bit too broken actually. Probably it would be too broken, because Akali, for example, can slow, but only in specific areas with her Q, but she can get many Qs off that do deal actually more damage than Ekko's Q does. For example, Akali Fandom. Now I know that Akali's Q has shorter range, and it may not be the best wave clear, although after a certain amount of time it does provide more wave clear. So we can see that the damage, right, scales similarly up the flat damage as Ekko's Q, but eventually it's gonna deal more damage and also it can be more reliable. Now I get it that arguably it's shorter range, right? It's actually shorter range, but look, as I said, Ekko's Q can be quite unreliable, so that's another argument, right? So that was like something on my mind, but possibly Ekko would be too broken if he had like 2 Qs, right? So I think that's just a bit might be a bit like too much. But that would be like a way of working around it. I think that's pretty much it about Ekko. Yes, of course, like if you have anything to add to this conversation, make sure to leave a comment in the comment section. If you're willing to have a healthy conversation about it, then I would definitely respond to your comment and we can talk about certain things. So yeah, that's it for now. Or actually, there was one more idea actually that was in my mind. So when Ekko ults, he goes back 4 seconds in time. But 4 seconds ago, maybe I wasn't exhausted by the enemy vein. So it would be nice if he would actually cleanse off that certain ignite or exhaust, because lore-wise it would make sense. Like I didn't get exhausted when I was like 4 seconds ago, right? 4 seconds ago I didn't get exhausted, so it would make sense that you would cleanse off certain effects, because 4 seconds ago those effects didn't affect you. For example, even logically, like when you ult inside of Mordekaiser's ult, you should get out, but you actually don't get out, which doesn't even make sense, because 4 seconds ago you weren't in Mordekaiser's ult. That doesn't even make sense. So it wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be like even too broken if you would like remove some harmful effects. Maybe exhaust would be a bit too much. I would say maybe exhaust could be a little too much, right? But it would be nice if you would be able to remove like at least like some champion debuff effects on his ultimate, right? Like poisonous effects and stuff like that, right? Then that's it for now, guys. Have a nice day.